The typical worship team configuration for the vast majority of local congregations consists of an acoustic guitar or two, a bass guitar, a drum set, either an acoustic drum set, an electronic drum set, or some kind of percussion, an electric guitar or two, and a keyboard/piano. Now, in the last several videos, we have focused on each of those typical instruments individually. But what about the worship team that uses atypical configurations, or the worshiper who wants to offer their bagpipe, ukulele, or xylophone skills to the worship team? Well, let's talk about it. If you are a miscellaneous instrument player or a worship leader who is trying to incorporate miscellaneous instruments into the worship team, we're going to walk through some super helpful tips in today's Weekly Worship Thoughts. Miscellaneous instruments typically sound better when added to a solid musical foundation. There are not too many people who are lining up to hear a timpani solo, although that would sound pretty cool. But the timpani sounds absolutely awesome when added to the solid musical foundation of an orchestra. Remember the musical pie illustration? Each slice represents a different piece of a song's instrumentation. Miscellaneous instruments typically sound best when they represent a smaller slice of the musical pie. All right, for this example, we're going to do a song called Great Things You Have Done, and I'm going to use the acoustic guitar as our main foundational instrument, so it will be the solid piece. And we're going to have Taylor on the violin play the part that would be played by the electric guitar, but we don't have an electric guitar, and this is a perfect opportunity for a miscellaneous instrument to shine. So for this song, here's the foundation with the acoustic guitar. You'll have her come in and just play whole notes. Then she'll take the electric guitar riff and it'll sound like this. Pretty cool. Pay attention to the fundamental frequency range in which the miscellaneous instrument is playing. If this instrument is playing in the same basic range as any of your typical instruments, then the players of the typical instruments may need to back off to provide more sonic space. There's only one pie. If you are adding more slices, you need to make the other slices a bit smaller. Pay attention to tuning. Not all instruments are created equal. Sometimes adding a miscellaneous instrument or two means that you will have to play in a different key, one that is more comfortable for the miscellaneous instrument to be played in. In some cases, the other musicians may even have to tune a bit differently for all of the instruments to sound in tune with one another. Now, once again, not all instruments are created equal. Most of the typical worship team instruments have an easy way to plug them into the sound system. Many miscellaneous instruments do not have an easy way to plug in. Therefore, you are likely adding live mics to an already acoustically complex environment. Now, this should not deter you from working to find a solution, but be aware that the extra open mics on the stage often translate into extra feedback. A worship leader's dream can quickly become a sound engineer's nightmare. Now, I sometimes play mandolin for the worship team. And it's a pretty cool instrument. One of the things that's crazy about it is it's got 8 strings instead of 6 or 4 or whatever. But I had a hard time getting the mandolin to really cut through the mix, so I ended up adding a pickup to it. And this is a really simple solution. If you're having a problem with open mics, you're having trouble getting your instrument to really cut through, I would say the mandolin, unless you're in a bluegrass band, is an atypical miscellaneous instrument. But now that I've got this pickup and I can plug directly in, it works really well. Another instrument that I like to use a lot is the ukulele. It's just got a cool sound to it, but once again, was having a hard time getting a ukulele to really cut through the mix and didn't like adding a lot of microphones to an already complex environment. So this is a great solution. It actually has its own pickup. You can plug it in and you can jam out with the thing just ringing through the sound system. A lot of instruments do have an option for figuring out how to bypass the microphone that can be so troublesome and allowing you to plug directly in. If you can do that, that will really give you a lot of success using a miscellaneous instrument. Sometimes there is one song on your set list that could really benefit from a miscellaneous instrument. Let's say a violin, for instance, and you happen to have a violinist in your congregation. Well, that's great. Feel free to just bring them on for that one song. It's actually less distracting to have them play for just one song than it is to make them stand up on stage and be a part of every song, especially if the other songs don't really benefit from the addition of a violin. Now, it's also okay to just use a miscellaneous instrument for every song. If it's working for you, go ahead and just make the miscellaneous instrument or instruments the highlight of the set list. Give your miscellaneous instruments a big old slice of the musical pie and allow the congregation to experience something different for that particular morning. I would not encourage you to do this often, but an occasional bluegrass Sunday with banjo, fiddle, mandolin, spoons, and a wash tub could be a lot of fun. Just because some famous recording artists use an accordion on their record doesn't mean that you have to. Now, I know it's tempting to be cool and to sound just like the record, but just because you have the same instrument does not mean it sounds the same as the recording. Many miscellaneous instruments have a unique sound that comes from using a technique that takes years of practice before it can be played skillfully. Personally, I would much rather hear that accordion part played on the electric guitar or on a keyboard instead of hearing it played poorly on an actual accordion. At the end of the day, most worship teams use the typical setup that I described earlier because it just works. Always remember that our job is to point people to Jesus, not distract them from Him. Still, our God is wildly creative, and His creativity is a part of our DNA as well. Adding skillfully played miscellaneous instruments can be a deeply meaningful way to worship our Creator together. If you can add miscellaneous instruments to your worship team, do it. If you don't have the ability, that's perfectly fine as well. Whatever is not enhancing the worship is distracting from the worship. Don't distract people from Jesus. If you are a miscellaneous instrument player, what was one interesting truth or idea that stood out to you about your instrument? And how do you think that truth or idea will help you in the future? If you are not a miscellaneous instrument player, what did you learn about how to effectively communicate with the miscellaneous instrument players in your worship team? In your own words, how would you say miscellaneous instruments fit into the typical worship music pie? How big of a slice should they get? What is the main role for a miscellaneous instrument in a typical worship team setting? Do you have any miscellaneous instruments in your own worship team context? If so, do you think you typically give them too big of a slice, too small of a slice, or just right? Given the information that you just received, what do you think is the #1 thing that miscellaneous instrument players in your specific worship team context should work on in order to improve the overall quality of the worship team as a whole?